put people through experiences, because when they're in that torture camp,
we can just stop and check in with
I get emotional a lot on this stuff.
This is great.
But
your emotions so beautiful.
There was an experience where one of the guys, he has an issue with his leg, and they put him in the back of a car and they start driving like crazy, and they're bouncing off the walls of the car and stuff. I mean, it's pretty intense. It really is. I should just sign more liability waivers, but they got out of it. And one of the guys that was in the car with him, I have a picture of this, but he get out and the guy was crying because his leg was hurting so bad, and he was just, grown man had broken down a little bit, and the other dude is just holding him and hugging him, and the amount of love that was shared, and because they went through that experience, they're comfortable sharing things they never would otherwise.
All right, welcome back to Flourish or Fold, Stories of Resilience. We are filming on location today in Salt Lake City at the Rookery Studios, and I have an incredible guest to share with you today. We've got Jimmy Rex, who is an entrepreneur. He is an author. He's a prolific public speaker, and he's also leading a tremendously large group of men to help them find greater health, wealth, happiness, inspiration, and to simply be enough. So welcome to the show, Jimmy. I'm just delighted to have you here and to be here in your studio.
Yeah, no, I'm so honored to be a guest on the show. I love everything that you're doing. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. With the Flourish or Fold podcast, it's really been about sharing the behind the scenes look of what it means to face challenges. And I think people can look at you, people can look at me, and, luminary athletes, people that are on the sports field, on the movie screen, and say, they just got there because, their path was paved, the way was made clear. And I think what we find when we peek behind the curtain is that, in fact, that is really not true, that we've all had tremendous challenge that has shaped and formed us along the way. And so part of this show is about really getting to share the challenges that have occurred for us, all along the way. And so I'm thinking maybe we just sort of dive in. I'm excited because you're really in a position now in life where you are actually leading a lot of people through their own transformation. You've got, north of 400 men in your coaching group. You started a group now for women, so the Queens group that won't be left behind. And so you're in this position of leading and developing people. And so maybe we can just rewind the clock a little bit and say, let's think about a challenge that you've faced in the past, and how has that formed you into the person you are today?
Yeah, no, I love digging into that. I think so much of who we are as adults has to do with a lot of the way that we are raised or things that happened to us as kids. And, it's funny because a lot of times people will tell those stories, and as an adult, you want to be like, oh, that's not that tragic or whatever else. But in those moments, it's when we're formed. I'll talk about one in particular. When I was 14 years old, I grew up in a baseball family. My brother was the 2-time state MVP. Baseball was life. And my dad, in my house, you got love by being better at sports, right? Like that was kind of just, so there was this definite drive to be the best I could be. And when I was, a kid, 10, 11, 12, 13, I was on the all-star teams. We'd travel around the country and stuff. When I was 14, we moved to a new area. I had been in that area for about a year. So I was meeting all these friends. We'd been on the team together the year before. And at the end of the year, they have this ceremony where they, announce the all-star team, and they give the winners of all the different first place in the league, second place, all that. Well, everybody's parents are there, grandparents, and it's kind of like an amphitheater stadium. And so the coach is out on the field, and I'm sitting there with my 15 best friends. And we're all sitting on about the second, third row of this amphitheater. And they start calling the 14-year-old all-star team. And, again, baseball was life. I don't even think I had a shirt that didn't have something to do with baseball on it. And one by one, they start calling the kids up, my friends that I'm sitting with, and they'd go out onto the field and get their trophy and their hat and everything. And I remember I'm sitting there, there's about 6 of us left, and I look out and there's 5 more trophies left. And it hits me because I know who's sitting next to me, and they're all very good baseball players. And I was like, oh my gosh, I might not have made it. And one by one, they call these guys up, my buddies, until I'm the last one sitting there by myself.
Oh my gosh.
As you can just imagine the shame, the embarrassment, the loneliness of sitting there, 14 years old, the most impressionable age for a boy, right? And I'm sitting there and watching all my best friends celebrating on the field. And I can even feel a little bit of, they're like, oh no. And I'm just sitting there by myself. And I didn't know what else to do. And so I just started to cry. And, the one thing that happened in that moment is I don't know where this self-awareness came from. I'm just grateful for it. But in that moment of pain, maybe to this day, one of the most painful moments I've ever had, I had this self-awareness and I said to myself, I said, Jimmy, you weren't good enough because you didn't work hard enough. And then I said, I will never feel this way again because somebody else outworked me. And that was the day I became an achiever, right? Like that was the day. And so from that day forward, I just poured myself into always needing to be the best. And the following year, to kind of, piggyback that story, my dad, again, he saw the pain that I went through, and I wasn't that good of a player. I was short, I was, small, I was slow, and I hadn't really hit my puberty spurt yet. And so as I was going into ninth grade, so a couple months after this, he had this idea. He, knew of some other baseball players in a different part of the city that their dad had held them back a year in school. And because of that, they got that extra year, which is huge in high school. It's a night and day difference. And they became like the best players in the state. And my dad put a lot of pressure on me to do that. He's like, hey, I've got this idea. This will help you be one of the best players in the state. You can make the team, all these things. And he wanted me to get held back a year. But I was one of the smartest kids. I was one of the oldest kids in my grade. I had an amazing group of friends still. And even though that whole summer I had to sit home by myself, it was a really bad summer. It was a very lonely summer. And he's like, let's get you held back. And he offered me a car if I did it. He offered to pay for my college if I did. He had my older brothers who I looked up to try to convince me to do it. And ultimately, I remember we're sitting in my driveway. It was right before I had to make the decision, because once you go into ninth grade, you don't get that year of eligibility back. You have to do it in eighth grade. And so it was, again, right before I started that freshman year of high school. And we're in his truck in the driveway, and he says, all right, like, you got to make a decision. Are you going to do this? And I thankfully had enough guts. I was, a strong enough willed kid. I said, Dad, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to get held back. And he looked me in the eyes, and God bless him. He was, just trying to probably just motivate me or whatever. But he said, Caleb, just so you know, you're not good enough. You'll never play baseball again. And all I heard was, you're not good enough. Right. And so I, being not so intelligent, not knowing the power of words and affirmations and all these things at that time, wrote underneath my hat, you're not good enough.
Oh gosh.
And I wore the same hat for 3 years in a row that says, you're not good enough, all day, every day. I just kept pounding that message. And so as a teenager, in my 20s and even early 30s, that was the message that was always running for me, is you're not good enough. You're not good enough. And so everything I did was just trying to prove, and God bless me, I just wanted to be loved, but I wanted to prove, that I was good enough, that I was worthy of that love. And so every decision I made, I look back now, some of the things I did trying to just prove I was good enough. I'd be the guy on Facebook posting everything that was trying to make me look successful. And I was, by all means, a huge success as far as, worldly things go. But underneath it all was this message running the whole time that you're not good enough. Mm-hmm. And so that, really defined a lot of who I became in those years after that.
Wow. So I think something that happens, with and for people who are pursuing success, big goals, is, we can tap into different places within us to motivate us. Mm-hmm. And some people tap into a positive place, an affirming place, a place that's loving and kind and supportive. And some people tap into a place that's negative and shaming, and we're putting ourselves down as a motivational fuel to keep going. And what I find is people who are sort of tapped into this, kind of, I'm not good enough, generally speaking, as a motivator from within, they have a really hard time letting that go. Mm-hmm. Because they think that is the secret sauce. They think that is their competitive edge, that negativity and that constantly being, like, as you said, in a moment of proving it and never being good enough, that's like the special energetic force that they have driving them. And what I find is it's actually not, that there's energy that's being put toward putting yourself down. And therefore, that's actually taking away from the full complement of energy that you could be harnessing to motivate yourself from a more positive place. So talk with us about then, like, you've got this hat, it says you're not good enough, you're wearing it for 3 years, like on your head, the sort of irony and importance of that is not lost on any of us. And so have you transitioned to tapping into a new energy center within yourself? And what was that journey like? How did you go about doing that?
Yeah, no, it's actually a beautiful story, kind of what happened. And so ultimately I didn't think about that hat again till I was in my mid 30s. I was just living my life, and I had a good life, but one of the things that Tony Robbins always says is, success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. And so even though I was achieving all these things, I do think there was a level of fulfillment that I just was not ever reaching, because I was always coming out of this place of fear. Like you said, instead of motivating myself out of love, it was out of fear, and that'll work. You hear, people like Tom Brady and Michael Jordan. I mean, Michael Jordan's retirement speech, he's still, going off about getting cut as a sophomore in high school, and all these things. And so they used that fuel, that negative fuel, to whatever, like, become great. But I think there was a level of fulfillment they never got to, right? And which is kind of sad in some ways. And you see them self-destruct in every other area of life, and in a lot of times. And so for myself, I was, in full disclosure, I was having my very first plant medicine experience. And I hadn't thought of this hat in 20 years, and I saw it. I saw my hat in this experience, and I saw the words that I wrote. And I mean, I'm a men's coach. I know exactly what I did. I was just like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And I realized in that moment how much of my life was driven by this fear of not being good enough. And this kind of voice came to me, or whatever. It wasn't like just a constant that said, hey, Jimmy, this has served you, but it no longer does. It's time to let it go. And in that moment, I was able to release it and just be like, oh my gosh, like how beautiful that the message was, this has served you, but it no longer does. And then it also was like, and release your dad. He carries a lot of shame over this. And so I call my dad at like 10:30 at night,
as you do after a plant medicine ceremony.
Yeah, I'm still in the middle of it. I'm like my super Mormon dad. This is the first time I've ever experienced anything like this. And I call him up, and I'm just like, he's like, hey, what's up? And I was like, Dad, I was like, hey, I want to talk to you about something. And he had, my dad, 95% of the time was an amazing dad. There was that 5% was not great. And because of that, there was some challenges with our family, 7 kids. And it had been a long time since my dad had been a part of my parents had divorced, and he'd made some decisions. And because of that, he wasn't really around much and at all when the whole family was together. And it had been that way for quite a while. And I just called him up and I said, hey, Dad, I was just thinking about some things. I want to tell you, I just want to thank you, Dad, for the way that you raised me. I said, there was a lot of things that obviously you haven't been able to be a part of recently because of some, things that happened, but I want you to know I love my life. And a lot of that is because of the way that you raised me. So I just wanted to call and say thank you. And he just started bawling, and he said, I did my best. And I said, I know, Dad, and it was good enough. I just want you to know that. Like, I really do love my whole life. And a lot of that is from the good and the bad that I experienced as a kid. And he just, from that day forward, me and my dad have had this beautiful relationship too. It's been 5 years now. And it was just really a really healing moment for me and for him. And so since then, it was funny because I was so driven before this experience. I mean, I was the #1 realtor in Utah several years in a row in my county and in my office of just the whole Western United States. I was one of the top agents. I was, when I was a missionary, I was the #1 most baptizing missionary. When I was dating, I felt like I had to go on a date with every attractive girl in town. I was just all these things.
That sounds really tough.
That part of it
all the dating.
Bad, but my point was I was just always so driven, right? I had this motives. And after this experience, it got so hard to get in the office and work because I was no longer driven from this thing that if I wasn't #1, what would that mean? I knew I was enough. I knew I was good. And so it was quite fascinating. And I had to just revamp my entire purpose and everything that I was doing. And thankfully about that same time, I went, to an event where I came up with my new life purpose, and it became my driving force. And it's so much more beautiful place. And now with what I do now, I can't imagine trying to run this group if I was doing it out of a place of fear and insecurity. And so the new purpose I came up with was the purpose of my life is to share my tremendous love with all of God's children, bringing happiness to others through my playful soul and by being an example of living an extraordinary life. And that became this new purpose. It's all just love and abundance.
Can we get an amen on that?
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I know when I first came up, I was, you do it at a Date with Destiny. It's another Tony event. And you spent a couple of days on this. And when I finally hit it, it was like very emotional to me because I was like, that's my purpose for my life. And so that's what I try to do now. And that's really from that point on, it was funny because about a year after that, I had sold the most expensive home ever in Utah at that point. It was a $32.5 million house around that time. This was about 4 years ago. So about a year after this whole experience with my hat. And clear as day, I was the number one agent that year. And I was just like, I need to do something more impactful. Like it no longer, because I didn't need to prove myself to anybody anymore, because it no longer was this fear of not being loved if I didn't, my biggest fear used to be to not be number one and have people say he used to be somebody. That was like my fear for like a decade, right? Because once I hit that spot, I didn't want to lose it. And once that was gone, I really got to step back and go, wait, where's my highest and best use? What do I truly want to do with my life? Like, how can I create the most impact? And I decided, that was such an impactful experience for me. And then watching some of my friends have different experiences coming into integrity and just building friendships with really deep, meaningful friendships with a lot of people that I was friends with, I said, I want to help other people connect this way, and the pandemic had just happened and people were really starved for community, for relationships, for friendships. And, I started studying this and, 55% of grown men don't have a friend group. 28% of adult men don't have a single best friend. I started thinking to myself, like, the devil divides us and God puts us together. And so I started thinking, like, how can I help people connect on a deeper level? And it led me to what I'm doing now. And so the entire purpose of what I get to do now is I just help people connect on a deep level. And every single day, these guys are going out. Like last night, one of our guys in our group, he's from Lebanon and his family, and they opened a new rug store here in Salt Lake. And we had 25 guys from our group there, supporting him. And he's feeding us this amazing Lebanon food. And then after that, there was another buddy threw a 40th birthday party, and, a bunch of us were there. And it's just every single day. Tonight, one of the guys, he owns a restaurant. He's having a party. We'll have 100 guys from our group there, and it's just this community that these guys are supporting each other. But it all came from this like moment when I had that shift where I no longer needed to prove myself, because I would have never been able to get out of real estate. I mean, I couldn't take off a day. I couldn't even take off one morning, let alone allow myself to just be in this spot where, and by the way, when you're not trying to push all the time, you just attract, it's amazing how much more abundant everything gets. And so I didn't do less. I didn't have less success. It was multiplied big time by letting it just be instead of trying to force it all the time.
That's really powerful. And I think you've done a really important thing in how you've described your journey. And I think you've also, for some people out there who are afraid to let go of this unworthiness, this like not being enough. And then you talked about how once you did let go of that, once you did engage in forgiveness for yourself, for your father, it's so powerful about how you allowed yourself to be enough and then had a parallel process with him where you allowed him to be enough and how that brought you together. I think you've also like confirmed this fear for people that when they let go of not being enough, that they're going to lose their edge. You said it became very hard for you to get into the office. And I think what's important for us to talk about is there was some retraction. There was a shift in focus. I don't know that you talked about it in the sense of like a loss there, right? But you had a big shift and you had a big pivot. So for people who might recognize today that they are fueling themselves from a place of not being good enough, they're holding on to it, they're afraid to lose their edge and what will happen.
Yeah.
What could you tell those people about the process of what it means to shift from into a place of being good enough and how to maybe like start that journey and to be courageous enough
Sure.
to stop fueling from a place of not good enough and allow that to take them on a journey to what may ultimately lead them to their true life's purpose.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, it deserves to be touched on more because it was this transformative thing. It was scary. Like, that's not to be lost. It was very scary. And that you caught that. Because my whole identity was being number one. My identity was being the best. My identity was pushing harder than anyone else, working harder than anyone else. It goes back to that 14-year-old boy on top of it, right? Mm-hmm. I will never feel like this again because I got outworked. Like, that was the story that I was telling myself. But what that was doing was robbing me of peace. It was robbing me of being able to attract in much better things that I couldn't even see because I was so busy working and being and trying to succeed, right? And so when I took that step back, it was uncomfortable at first. Like, I felt like I was doing something illegal. It's like walking out of Costco before they check your receipt or something. I just couldn't handle this weird feeling of taking my mornings back, going on walks in the middle of the day, going to the gym in the middle of the day, just these things that are so good for me. But what was really cool was once I started to adjust to this and it started to become a little bit more familiar, because a lot of it was just bad habits at that point, right? And by the way, I work probably more hours than ever now, but I love every minute of it. I don't even talk about it like it's work because it's so fun for me to do it. Real estate was a grind. I talk about grit and perseverance and all those things. It was like, I was just grinding. And I look back now, it's like, I'm so glad I went through it, but I wouldn't do that again. I mean, it was really hard. What I do now, even though it's work, like every day I just get to pour into these men and help and be a resource for them and connect them with other people that get to help them. And so it's, I would have never allowed myself to have this life had I not taken my foot off the gas and allowed myself to heal and not need to be that number one agent, not need to be that person always pushing for more. And so even though it's going to sound and feel scary to not have that drive, you don't lose your habits. You don't lose your ability to give and to pour into other people. And so I work as hard as ever now, but it's just out of a completely different energy and a completely different place and a completely different peace within myself.
That's really powerful. And I think the way that you talked about that is not taking your foot off the gas necessarily, but you've transitioned your energy and you're in more joy and you're more excited. You're actually working harder than ever. I love that you said that. Not that you need to, but I think for people that are really afraid of letting go of this, what is driving us?
Well, and I would ask them, I'd say, what are you really letting go of? Because even though it feels good to be number one, it feels good to not have nice things, to make a lot of money, it feels good, but it's so fleeting. I mean, if you ever bought something that you wanted forever and, you bought this new thing and within a day, a week, all the emotion that you wanted from buying it is gone. Now you just got this stupid thing in your garage or whatever, right? And so I think that's what was happening over and over again. It's like I was chasing this new high and my baseline for what would satisfy me got, worse and worse. It pushed me I traveled all over the world. I went to over 100 countries. I went to every major sporting event and sat in the front row. And I was just chasing anything that would give me a dopamine hit high enough to try to help me feel good. Mm-hmm. And now I can get that same feeling. I get better feelings than that just sitting within myself, going into nature truly and spending time doing very little. Sometimes I can get the feeling much, much better.
For all of you listening in to Flourish or Fold Stories of Resilience, I want to share with you an online course that we have on our website. We're going to go ahead and drop the website in our show notes, or you can go to www.resilience-leadership.com and check out our offerings. We've got an incredible course for you called Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People. So if you love what you're learning about in this podcast, if you love these conversations on resilience, if you love hearing about how you can more effectively face the inevitable moments of challenge, change, and complexity, or the 3 C's as I call them, in your life, then go ahead and check out our online course, Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People, because what you are going to find is a one-on-one tutorial with me around each of those 5 practices, as well as an introduction and a conclusion. We've got hours of content that is going to allow you to engage in direct coaching and learning with me on the 5 practices. Go ahead and check it out, and I hope you'll join us in our online course, Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People. Yeah, I love how you said that. And if I was going to sort of put that in the language of resilience and the 5 practices of highly resilient people, that third practice of connection, we can be so focused, community is great, friends are great, colleagues and peers and family members are great to lean into and to support us. And yet, what I think happens when we're operating from a place of not being enough or proving it is it becomes about like this external life that we're demonstrating to other people, as opposed to going home to ourselves and being at peace and comfortable within ourselves, like you talked about.
Yeah, when I first read about that practice or heard about it from you, it totally resonated with me, because before I was connected to self, it was very obvious to people. Like, it wasn't obvious to me, but I was always chasing the next. I'd go to a party and I'd have to meet every person there because I needed to like somehow feel that connection, because I wasn't feeling that within myself. There was probably, no joke, there was probably a period of 7 or 8 years where I didn't spend a single night not going and doing something or having people over. I mean, for a decade straight, I had to, like, if I'd be home and there was nobody to go hang out with, and thankfully as a realtor, it's part of what made me great at what I did. I just was always networking and around people, right? That's why I know everybody in Utah, because I couldn't stay home. And it's so funny because I would just go do anything to be around people. And if I couldn't find a party, I'd go to the grocery store. I'd go back to the gym for the second time that day. I just was trying to connect, but instead of connecting with myself. So, when I started working with a couple different coaches, one of my brilliant life coaches had me go at least once a week. I had to go sit in nature with no phone, completely just sit with myself for an hour or two at a time. And as I started doing this, the first time I did it, that was the longest 12 minutes of my life before I gave up on it, Yeah. And now, it took me 2-3 years of trying almost every day to meditate, and I would just bail after 5 minutes, 7 minutes. And now I get my 20 minutes in every single day where I'm just completely calm and still. And because I finally got connected to myself, and it's really nice. Now I don't ever have a feeling like I have to go out. I don't ever feel like I have to prove myself. I can sit home and be just as content just being, as opposed to, needing to find this big party or whatever's going on. I don't get FOMO anymore. I don't get that, fear of maybe there's a better option I could go hang out with or whatever.
Yeah. And what you're describing, I think, for people who are listening to this episode, who might be asking themselves, am I motivating myself from a place of not being good enough? Am I truly living into my life's purpose? I think one of the signs that we have not connected in a deep way with ourselves is just what you're sharing, which is that sense of I've constantly got to be on the go with people, doing activities, creating something, productivity. And so I think for anyone who's listening to this episode, you get to ask yourself that question. You get to do a self-assessment today and say, how comfortable am I being alone with myself? Can I do that without my phone, without external stimulation, without the TV on? Can I do that for 5 minutes? Can I do that for 12 minutes? Can I do that for a full day? And that's a really important question for, I think, all of us to ask ourselves, because if we're not able to be alone with ourselves, that is a tremendous opportunity for growth and development that we get to tap into. And I think so often when we talk about growth and development, we talk about what are we going to do? What are we going to add on? We're going to do more of, we're both, big Ed Milet fans. And so, the power of one more, doing that one more thing, grinding, when everybody else is, asleep and at home. And that's really important and really powerful. And what's as powerful is to say, to your point, what am I willing to let go of? What am I so excited about creating and developing and coming home to myself that I'm actually willing to let go of some things?
Yeah. Well, and I've been studying a lot of, Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius. So my book that's coming out in February is called Be One. And it comes from the Marcus Aurelius quote, waste no time arguing about what a good man should be one. And, what he talks about, what the Stoics talk about is the richest man isn't the man that has the most, it's the man that needs the least, right? And it's being able to be with nothing and being happy in that place. And it does feel so weird at first, but it truly is like the secret. It's the more you try to do and do. Because that was, for me, was always easy. I could always go do more. I could always work harder. I could always go achieve something. For me, the true challenge, and people would be like, dude, what's next in your life? What's next? And they didn't like the answer I'd give them, but I said, I'm actually trying to do a lot less. I'm trying to stay alone. I'm just trying to be with myself. I'm trying to, I took 3 months off this summer from dating to just be with myself and see what that was like. That experience that I was so afraid of, of not having somebody. And I had to force myself to go to that place. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's actually a pretty fun place to be. And all of a sudden you're not afraid of the thing that you're trying to essentially achieve the most. And so, yeah, it's not always more to do more. Sometimes the work is doing quite a bit less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That dating piece is really powerful too. I'm such a big believer in, we talk about being out there searching for our soulmate. And I'm a big believer in coming home to ourselves and being our own soulmate and becoming the person that we most want to be connected with. Yeah. And then from that place, being the best version of ourselves to then enter into a relationship.
Yeah. So many people in relationships, they can't be alone, and it forces them to make some really bad decisions. And I used to, one of my little sayings I came up with is, when you fall in love with yourself, you never spend a day without somebody you love. And being able to do that, then you come from a different energy than when you're searching or you're desperately needing or anything like that. And so I think it is a completely different frequency that you're on and that you're attracting in, as opposed to trying to, it's like if you have a fire, if you build a big fire, everybody will come get warmed by the fire. If you're trying to run, parts of the fire to everybody else, you're just going to burn out.
That's a really, I like thinking about that visual. That's super, super helpful. All right, let's talk about forgiveness. So you talked about being on a journey where you were able to forgive yourself and move forward. And then you were also able to call your father, call your dad and forgive him. And, forgiveness is tough. I'm a believer that, I think that one of the hardest people to forgive is actually ourselves. And, we're here talking about forgiveness, and forgiveness is not something that I think lives inside of any particular religion. And yet I've always been really struck by, in the Bible, how Jesus's followers said to him, how many times, should I forgive someone? Should it be 5 times, 7 times? And Jesus says 7 times 7 times, or 7 times
70.
7 times 70. Thank you. So I did that math one time, and I think it's like 490. And that has really resonated with me, because when I've gone to forgive myself for something, or I've attempted to forgive someone else, it's like, I think I've done it. I think I've crossed that threshold for forgiveness. And yet then some of that old resentment or anger will kind of creep back. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess, and so it has been a process for me of forgiving myself, forgiving another person, oftentimes many times, until I really feel that forgiveness is solidified. Can you talk with us about what your journey to forgiveness for yourself and for your father, what does that really look like in practice?
Sure. Yeah. Because there was a period, where I didn't talk to my dad for 2.5 years. I mean, it was essentially a dead relationship. And it started for me with, I started just praying, and I was asking for the strength to forgive. That's all I was praying for. It's like, help me want to forgive my dad. And I remember I read a book called The Anatomy of Peace. It's a brilliant book by the Arbinger Institute. And it just talked about how we haven't lived other people's lives. And so when we throw our judgments on them, it's so unfair, because we just don't know what their experiences are causing them to do. Each person is probably doing the best they can with the information they have, with the abilities they have. And around that same time, with my dad, this was even before, I called him about that other thing, but this was my true forgiveness moment, the first one with my dad. And I just, I just said in my prayer, I said, God, show me how help me to see my dad in a way that maybe I don't. And I remember I went to go see him. I called him up 2.5 years later, the Paradise Baker here in Sandy. And when I showed up, I was scared. I didn't talk to him in 2.5 years, and I remember when I saw him, there was this feeling, and I've never felt this way again about a human being, but like I had this moment where God just let me see my dad through his eyes. I know that's what it was. And it was just this pure, just love. There was no judgment. And all it was like, Jimmy, quit judging this person. Just love him. You don't need expectations for him. He can't hurt you if you just love him. And it was like this overwhelming feeling. And I also knew, like, if God can see my dad this way, then he can see me this way. And so I immediately had this connection with God about him seeing me in that light. And so I've always actually been really easy on myself, like as far as giving myself grace. I have a high standard for myself. I will absolutely course correct every single time I get out of line, which, obviously we all do that. But I've just had this feeling that, like, God, I think he likes me. I think God laughs at this person, me, that is trying to figure out his life and trying so damn hard to do it. And I think he like has his little friends up in heaven or whatever. And he's just like, you're not going to believe what freaking Jimmy did today, and he can laugh at the stupid things that I do. And so I kind of look at it that way because it helps me go, I think if God can laugh at the mistakes I've made, I think I can laugh at the mistakes I've made. And so I've really been good at giving myself grace. And because whether it's forgiveness for yourself or forgiveness for somebody else, like the reason we forgive is for us. It's, and the reason it's hard, you mentioned it's hard, is because you have to take the blunt of what happened. You have to go, I'm going to eat that part. I'm going to take that on. But when you do that, it's a gift that you give to yourself. Forgiving other people is not for them.
That's right.
They don't care. They're not holding on to it. They're living life, And when you forgive, and I've been able to experience, I think having that experience with my dad was such a gift because it was causing me problems. And, and there's, anytime you have that, that animosity going on underneath with somebody in your life, there's a level until you've at least done everything you can to correct that or make it right or forgive, you're going to be hanging on to something that's just going to eat you alive. And so having that experience really helped me firsthand to be able to experience how much relief there was in that forgiveness.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing in such a greater depth that story and that experience for you. Absolutely amazing. I want to transition for a moment over to community. And so I think what we're finding is, even kind of coming out of the pandemic, and it's been some years now, we're still finding, I think, that loneliness, that isolation, feelings of not knowing how to connect with other people, that's really reaching or has reached epidemic levels. And of course, there's all kinds of implications then for mental health, for well-being, for even our physical health. We did a study when I was at Cigna where we looked at people that felt very lonely. And then we looked at their physicality and their health. And we found that people that felt lonely or very lonely, that's, mental health. And then that actually translated to having an impact on their physical health that was as though they were morbidly obese or smoked a pack of cigarettes a day. And so now what you've done here is you've created community amongst 400 men. You've got a growing group of women. And for people who are wanting to build community, either in a particular geographic location or maybe across the nation, across the globe, how would you advise someone based on what you've learned and creating your coaching program for men? How do we go about getting reconnected and building community?
That's such a beautiful question. So, and for me, when I started looking like once real estate, I was like, I got to do something more impactful. I kind of had an imposter syndrome. I was like, who am I to coach people? I don't, I'm still figuring my stuff out all the time. But then it came to me, I was paying attention to the people that would reach out to me online all the time. And they would ask the same question, Jimmy, where do I find a group of friends like you have? And what I realized was deep down what I am is a community builder. And so I started to really break it down and deconstruct it and see, what do I do? Like, why are all my friends, like even today, I got a text, but just an hour ago with 3 of my other buddies on it who all met through me. and they're all going to go to the football game tomorrow, the Utah-Oregon game, right? I can't even go, but like, it was so cool. It's like, and this is all my friends have met all their best friends one way or another through me. And so I started going, what did I do? Like, how did we truly do this? I started breaking it down. And there's a couple things. Is number one is you have to protect the friendships of the people that you're around. And so I always protected the vessel. I was willing to have boundaries around people I didn't want around. Because if you have bad people around or people around that don't have the best interest of others, all the good people are going to go away. So the first thing you did is really establish what it means to be a good friend, and then being that person, but then also holding a standard to other people that come into your friend circle. The second thing is you have to invest. It has to be a conscious decision to go, I'm going to be a great friend. I'm going to build community. I'm going to have these relationships in my life. Because if you don't consciously do it, if you don't make it an intentional thing, nothing's going to happen. And the third one is, I always said, like, I think where a lot of people get caught up is like, well, nobody calls me. Well, nobody invites me to be a part of this. And it's like, no. Each one of you creates your own community, and you have to be the person that does that. And so for me, I just made it, I was very intentional about getting people together, throwing events. And then I also knew when they have emotional experiences, you can get 6 to 12 months worth of what feels like a normal relationship in like a weekend if you have deep connecting emotional experiences. And so, the more of those you can stack, the better off you're going to be. Like when I go, like I just took 70 of my guys to go run with the bulls in Spain. The friendships formed on that. There's a guy on that, his daughter sent me a text and she's just bawling. She's like, Jimmy, he has more friends in a month working with you guys than he's had his entire life, her dad. And, and this guy, and he's amazing. He shows up for everybody. He's just like such a cool guy. But he'd never had friends like this. They'd never connected on that deeper level, right? And so then the other thing is when people can truly let their guard down and be seen for the first time, a lot of people, their first time they can be seen, they can share things, they feel comfortable. So my job is to, create that container, that community where people do feel safe to talk about things that aren't popular or that, aren't necessarily make them look good or whatever. And when people can share in that setting and it's safe and they feel loved in that setting, they will do, it's intoxicating, and you want to share it with others. You want to bring others into that. So I did a morning walk with a guy today, and I said, how'd you find out about the program? He's only been with us for about a month. And one of the guys that joined about a year and a half ago, he said, so-and-so called me up. He just came, and he's very successful. This guy owns like 6 restaurants in town. He owns a brewery. Like, the guy's a very successful guy. And he said that his buddy called him up and he said, I need to talk to you. I'm coming over. And he just said to him, I said, I need you to trust me here. You need to join this group. And he's like, what are you talking about? And then he went on to say how it changed his life. And, that guy is down 40 pounds. He got back with his wife, who he had a strained relationship with. Like, he's just really changed everything for him. And he said, dude, you have to do this. And what we did for that guy, the only thing that we did for that guy is we helped him see himself. We helped him see his own greatness. And the friends that'll do that for you, people that are going to help you see why you're great, you'll do anything for them, and you want to bring other people in. So that's how community grows, because now that man has been changed. He brought in like 5 other guys. He literally went to this guy's office and basically said, you're doing this. And that's how community forms, and you get more like-minded people to join.
That's powerful. One of the last questions I want to ask you is about men and emotion. So as a woman, we talk about, girls and, sort of losing a sense of self-confidence as they get older. In those teenage years, maybe between 13 and 15, stop raising our hands, stop believing in ourselves. And yet, what we've found is that we often disconnect, little boys who ultimately become men from their emotional process 10 years earlier. When we say to boys that are between 3 and 5, don't cry, get back up, be a man, those types of messages. And then that works great, until that little boy grows up and he's, in his first, authentic relationship with another human, or in his first romantic relationship, and his partner turns to him and says, how do you feel about that? He's like, well, I haven't felt anything for 20 years. What do you want? So when you're bringing men together, are you finding that men have been disconnected from their emotional process? I see you nodding. And what's that process of, like you said, like showing someone who they truly are, bringing them back to themselves when they've been cut off from an important aspect of themselves.
Yeah. And there's a lot obviously that goes into that with what I do with the program. It's a 2.5-year program and all that. But one of the things I teach my guys is the goal is not to feel better. The goal is to feel more. And you try to help people understand not to run from emotions, not to suppress emotions, to be able to communicate them. I think one of the big problems that men have, it's actually a skills issue. It's not that they don't want to. It's they literally don't know how to do it. They don't know how to hold space. They don't know how to talk about their feelings. They don't know how to check in with their body and do some of these things. And so we start with that, right? Just being able to teach some skills like, hey, and we do exercises with them. One of the things we do a breathwork session. And then afterwards, we have some music playing and all the guys get up, and every one of the guys stares into the other guy's eyes for about 4 seconds. You don't say anything, you don't touch, and you just say to yourself, I love you, to that person in your head. And we do it with every person in the room, and just connecting on that soul level where all of a sudden every single guy will end up in tears at some point in this exercise because it's that emotion that you've been holding in, right? And so doing breath work, doing some of these exercises like that, we have a lot of time where I'll push them hard and I'll stress them so that they get to the point of breaking. Like we have some Navy SEAL people come in and put them through this torture camp, for an example, and it's brutal. I mean, they're tie their hands behind their back, put a bag over their head.
You put people through a torture camp?
Yeah, we waterboard them, the whole thing. I mean, it's pretty intense.
Why do you do that?
Because we want to stress them to a point where they finally can get to a spot where they haven't got to, where they are getting in touch with themselves. And so like the last time we did it, just as an example, that later that night, after we've done this torture camp, basically with the Navy SEALs, we give everyone a chance to share. And this last time we did, it was a couple months ago, and one of the guys got up and he started quivering, and he said, these words have never come out of my mouth, but I get emotional because these experiences are so special to me. But he says, I was sexually.
I love the emotion.
Yeah, he says, I was sexually abused as a kid. My neighbor in his treehouse, and this is what happened. And he'd never talked about it to his wife, to his family, nobody. And 38-year-old guy, and 50 dudes surround this dude to share him love and hugging him and helping him see that he's safe and all these things. And he's just a completely different human, since that time. But we put people through experiences because when they're in that torture camp,
we can just stop and check in with
I get emotional a lot on this stuff.
This is great.
But
your emotion's so beautiful.
There was an experience where one of the guys, he has an issue with his leg, and they put him in the back of a car and they start driving like crazy, and they're bouncing off the walls of the car and stuff. I mean, it's pretty intense. It really is. I should just sign more liability waivers, but they got out of it. And one of the guys that was in the car with him, I have a picture of this, but he get out and the guy was crying because his leg was hurting so bad. And he was just, grown man, had broke him down a little bit. And the other dude is just holding him and hugging him. And the amount of love that was shared. And because they went through that experience, they're comfortable sharing things they never would otherwise. And so the reason why we put them through these difficult things, I have them run with the bulls. I have them jump off cliffs. It's not just because we're being crazy. Like they go through a full exercise the day before they jump off the 250-foot cliff. It's a rope swing that catches them at the end. It's to help them leave behind a negative relationship, a bad habit, or a limiting belief, and they have a new identity when they come out of it. But these things that they do, you have to have extreme experiences so your body recognizes like we're changing something here. And doing that allows them to be vulnerable, allows them to connect on a deeper level. And so it's very well designed to go through these experiences so that they connect on this much deeper level. And those guys are, brothers for life now. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing about yourself and your experience, your life, the work that you're doing. It's clear how deeply invested you are in leading your group and the coaching and the connection that you have to your guys. For those people that are listening today that are like, I want more of this. I need more of this in my life. Maybe they want to join your group, how can they find you and get to participate in what you're contributing to the world?
Yeah, I mean, the best place to find me is my Instagram. It's Mr. Jimmy Rex. And in the bio is the link to my program. So you can check it all out. There's a lot of member stories, a lot about what this community is, what we do, how we do it. And so I post a lot anytime I'm speaking, or I have a couple annual events that we invite people to. This year we have Ed Milet and Chris Williamson come and speak, Prince EA. It's all there. I post everything through my Instagram. So the best place to find me is there on my Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, Jimmy, what an honor to get to invest this time with you, to get to know you at a deeper level, to hear your story. Thank you so much for being on the Flourish or Fold podcast today. You've been absolutely amazing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You were great.
For all of you listening in to Flourish or Fold Stories of Resilience, I want to share with you an online course that we have on our website. We're going to go ahead and drop the website in our show notes, or you can go to www.resilience-leadership.com and check out our offerings. We've got an incredible course for you called Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People. So if you love what you're learning about in this podcast, if you love these conversations on resilience, if you love hearing about how you can more effectively face the inevitable moments of challenge, change, and complexity, or the 3 C's as I call them, in your life, then go ahead and check out our online course, Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People, because what you are going to find is a one-on-one tutorial with me around each of those 5 practices, as well as an introduction and a conclusion. We've got hours of content that is going to allow you to engage in direct coaching and learning with me on the 5 practices. Go ahead and check it out, and I hope you'll join us in our online course, Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People.